Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Fantastic. My name's Neil Procter. I'm Head of Customer Systems for Centrica Hive, and I'm going to be talking about Salesforce versus Serverless, Battle of the Titans, or Match Made in Heaven. So what is this going to be about? I'm going to split this into three. So I'm going to start with an integration problem that we had at Hive, or a challenge that we needed to solve. Then I'm going to deviate in the middle to trying to define serverless, just kind of my own definition. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you read kind of the stuff out there and it can be a little bit confusing, especially if you come from the Salesforce world. And then at the end, I'm going to go back to the challenge we had and say how that kind of links to serverless. So I'm going to dive right in. So Hive loves the Salesforce platform. We run the business on Salesforce. We've got Salesforce at the center of everything we do business-wise. So we run all our sales channels through Salesforce. This is in a B2C context, so web sales come into Salesforce, call center sales, sales through partners, all our support channels, so email, web chat, etc. And we trigger a lot of the fulfillment, so delivering things to customers and installing Hive, things like Hive Active Heating. So it's a key platform for us, and it has been over time. But of course, you get to a point where Salesforce becomes a bit of a bottleneck if it's sat in the middle of everything like that. And although we started, we kind of built up Hive over time with Salesforce at the center. When we're looking in the future and we're looking to scale Hive to millions and millions of customers, then things like API limits and governor limits become a potential issue. Especially when you talk about integrating to things like more websites and mobile app where the traffic's very spiky. So kind of, it hasn't been a problem over time, but going forward it will be a problem. And equally, devices as well. We trigger a lot of customer support cases off the back of problems we see with devices, so like things being offline, etc. We've got about 5 million devices out there, so we're not going to be able to bring that kind of information, even a subset of it, into Salesforce. So we knew, or I knew a few years back, that we would need something a bit stronger in the middle, a bit more capable of dealing with volume to shift data around and kind of expose the Hive capability to external channels like websites, etc., or the Salesforce capability. It's not just Salesforce, actually, that we've got at the center of Hive. We've got Zuora, we've got Salesforce Marketing Cloud as well, and all these things are software as a service solutions. And of course, with a software as a service solution, you end up having limits in terms of scale. There we are. So what's the answer? So, we were thinking about what we could put in the middle there, in ESB traditionally, possibly. Some kind of API to expose the capabilities of those software as a service systems to the outside world. We had a few choices to make. And, we could have gone for more enterprise software licenses. I love to spend money on Salesforce. Fantastic. Write a big check, get locked into a contract. The longer the contract, the cheaper it is. So, all that kind of stuff. And, if you look at the context before, then MuleSoft maybe would be a logical choice. Maybe a bit of IoT, Cloud Heroku, maybe less so. But the problem that I had is that it was a little bit unpredictable, the volumes that we were going to get into the mix here. This is now about a bit over 2 years ago. And so I didn't really want to invest in something up front without with unpredictability being the case. And the other thing with enterprise software licenses is you're kind of forced to commit up front to quite a lot of stuff. So it's a bit like buying a hamper when all you want is a sausage roll and a bag of crisps. You know what I mean? It's, Salesforce licenses, who uses all their custom fields, custom objects? You've got a raft of stuff under your Salesforce license that you're paying for and you're not using. So, that was kind of a consideration. So I'm the giraffe on that picture. So I looked at what was happening elsewhere in Hive. So we got the Hive product, the thing that people control their heating with, their lights. Underneath the Hive products, again, a couple of years ago, people were talking about serverless. They were building serverless backends on AWS in this instance. I thought, well, that's quite interesting, because what they're doing underneath the product is a little bit similar to my requirements in that they're shunting around a lot of data, they're orchestrating that, talking to different systems in the back end. So I thought that's something to investigate. But I was a little bit torn because I've always been a big part of the Salesforce ecosystem and generally gone down the Salesforce track. So I felt like I was cheating a little bit if I go over to AWS. It was a little bit like, I don't know if anyone's seen the film Indecent Proposal. Put your hands up if you have. Yeah, probably not the millennials, but so it's a little bit like you've got Woody Harrelson, the husband, and Demi Moore, the wife, and then Robert Redford, the executive, rich business person. I felt a little bit like Demi Moore. I was a little bit torn. And if you put like Salesforce there, and then you got AWS over there, and then there's me as Demi Moore. I never thought I'd say that in a tech talk. I tried to replicate the face, and it all got too much. I got too confused, and so back to this story later. Anyway, right? We'll take that deviation into trying to define serverless, and no more Indecent Proposal. So what the hell is serverless? And there are a few different opinions about this, and I don't really care if I upset people or whatever. So let's go. So it was coined, that term only started growing around 2012, and from Google Trends. This is the graph there. And of course, there's still servers. You don't see them, always with technology, servers somewhere. It's not similar to trouserless, because that guy's got no trousers on. There's no trousers in that picture. Maybe it's a bit similar to fearless, where this guy looks like he's got no fear, but inside there's a little bit of fear. There was this definition that came up, and some people on the internet say this is where the serverless term came from. And let developers focus on applicational system, take away complexity of the back-end infrastructure. But surely we've all heard this before. This term got coined in 2012, but of course Salesforce has pretty much been pushing this message ever since. So what's the difference? Well, I think if we use the sort of standard definition of cloud computing, so we've got infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, I think that provides quite a good framework for seeing where serverless fits in. This existed before serverless, and serverless kind of came around a bit after. So if I put these things on in individual lanes here, and then put a few kind of examples, I think where serverless came from becomes a bit more apparent. So if you look at Salesforce, you've got Salesforce, which is software as a service, but also platform as a service. And within the Salesforce platform, you've got things like the API, you've got workflow orchestration, you've got code execution. It's all kind of bundled within the Salesforce platform. Equally, you've got something like Heroku, where similarly you've got those kind of things bundled in, and maybe a website is running on that. So that's obviously Salesforce a bit more for business applications, Heroku more for consumer-facing applications. And then you might have another website which is using infrastructure as a service, where the server is the back end. Now, of course, that one on the right, people don't talk about that one in terms of serverless when they're talking about serverless. But they also don't talk about Heroku and Salesforce in general. Those things, it's as if they never happened. So again, what's going on? Well, I think with the definition of serverless, what's going on is it's predominantly been driven by people who've been working in the bottom right there. The people who've been working with infrastructure as a service, and it's a kind of evolution of infrastructure as a service towards platform as a service. But it's a bit different to Salesforce and Heroku, because the different components that people talk about when they talk about serverless kind of exploded out. So it's like the database has been exploded out, the code execution, the API, into individual services which are priced at a very metered level. So it's a little bit like electricity or gas. You pay for what you use for those individual discrete services. And they scale individually as well. So it's different to some extent. It's definitely different to Salesforce platform. Heroku a bit less different, but I think that's where it's originated from. So those guys who've been working in the bottom right, they've not been really working with things like Salesforce. So at the point where they find they don't need servers anymore in 2012, and these services appear on platforms like Amazon, API Gateway, Lambda, DynamoDB, etc., then the term serverless comes up. But serverless, I think, is just a bad term if you look at that wider context, because really what it is, the word serverless assumes the server was the boundary, but if you've been working with Salesforce and Heroku, equally those platform as a service things could be a boundary. So this is really, for me, more about unbundling, because all those things that we just looked at are all serverless, but what people are really talking about when they talk about serverless is unbundling of these kind of discrete bits of computing, largely to support the increased kind of volume of data that we have in the modern world. So you get distributed architectures, things like Netflix, and backends that need to deal with huge amounts of data, and having a boundary around those services becomes quite a constraint for those kind of use cases. Salesforce actually tried it once to some extent, tried to take a bit of the platform and unbundle it. Does anyone remember what that was? Do you remember database.com? Anyone? So it doesn't really exist anymore so much. No one really talks about database.com. If you click on the link, I think, online, it just takes you to a different web page anyway. Database.com was the attempt to take the database bit of Salesforce and kind of put it out there as a service, but didn't really fly. So I think that potentially unbundled platform as a service or micro-pass or some other terminology is better than serverless. But I do think that if you look at platform as a service, it gives a kind of alternative to things like Heroku MuleSoft, which is a kind of integration platform as a service for certain contexts. You've still got these providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, doing all the infrastructure as a service thing, but they're also moving into this serverless area. I tried to put a definition out on Twitter based on all of that and thought, millions, billions of people on Twitter, what will the reaction be? So serverless is really unbundling of useful components into mini-pass services, scale individually, build individually, blah, blah. Serverless taken literally could mean SaaS or PaaS, but that's not what it is. And out of the billions, millions of people on Twitter, I got a like. So validated. I'm still waiting for Matt Goss, who follows me, from the 80s band Bros. Anyone remember Bros? Yeah, not sure why he follows me, but nothing yet. Maybe I'll get 2 once he gets around to it. Don't know, not sure. So the conclusion there is maybe no one cares, not sure, but never mind. So with all this thinking about serverless, I thought I'd give it a go. I'm not a developer. I buy these things and make choices around these areas, but I'm certainly not a developer. So I stuck my cowboy hat on and thought, well, maybe I can go into AWS and create some of this serverless stuff. And actually, the whole AWS thing is crazy. You go, you go online and you buy a cowboy hat and some toys and some books with your Amazon account, and then with that same account, you can go into the AWS console and create like a managed blockchain or whatever. Basically, take over the world. You've got a list of services, and you don't want someone like me in front of that. But anyway, I thought I'll create something with API Gateway, and I'll create a Lambda function. Lambda is some people actually define function as a service, which is what Lambda is, as serverless as well, and ignore everything else, but I'm not sure that's the right thing. But anyway, Lambda is one of the key things that's come along with all this serverless stuff. And it basically, because it's billing per function, so you can create an application, it's build a distributed application, and it's built per function. So on a very granular level, you can kind of measure how much, what you're paying for, and how to what degree it's worth it, which is a bit harder to do on a platform like Salesforce, I guess. But anyway, I thought I'll return a bit of text, like a hello world style thing. So I created a get endpoint on API Gateway, which I named Neil Stage Prod, which is just terrible, I don't know. And it returned a bit of text. So I got it to work. Absolutely fantastic. Is that enough of that? Probably. Back to my Hive story. So anyway, that's my joy of trying to define serverless, and unbundling, I think, is the key thing that I think about. back to my Hive story. So we needed something in the middle. What we were going to put in the middle? Well, MuleSoft was potentially an option, or based on what the Hive app guys were doing, and the fact that we had a lot of learnings around serverless AWS stuff, I thought, well, we could try that out. Now, I think it's almost, for some contexts, certainly ours, a no-brainer to at least try out the AWS capabilities, because it's such a low barrier to entry. You can use your shopping account, like I said. You don't even need to talk to a sales guy. Not talking to a sales guy is a world changer. You just tell developers, you know, I've got this idea, try it out, we'll do a spike on it, come back and, you know, we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll move somewhere else. So we decided to, over time, go with AWS Serverless as an API layer, certainly, with a lot of different things happening underneath it. And basically that API would front our sales channels, so things like incoming partner sales, the website, etc. And some support channels, obviously not things like email and web chat. Salesforce will still handle those things. But when it comes to device level support and triggering things, cases and emails and things from hubs being offline or heating being offline and proactively spotting problems in the home, then it's definitely got its place there. So what we did, so 2017 was when I thought we need to do something about this long term. Not a problem in 2017, but at some point it will be. So we, API Gateway Lambda and a few other bits of AWS, we created an API layer, which we call the customer API within Hive. And actually, no mean feat, we integrated with British Gas website and British Gas SAP, both of which are partner sales channels for Hive, so they can send us through sales through that API, and then we kind of manage the delivery and the fulfillment in the back end. 2018, we started using a few other bits and bobs underneath this API layer, so orchestrating things like payment failure, more partner sales, devices. We were dealing with about 1 million events per hour, interpreting using Lambda and different things, persisting in DynamoDB a bit, and then talking to Salesforce and Marketing Cloud to do proactive customer support stuff. And 2019, we're using loads more services than that, but we're integrating more with the Hive app, so we're going to have an ability to sell within the Hive app, which will plug into the API, and then in the back end, different systems like core Salesforce platform, etc. We've got a global engineer app, which is going to plug into that API layer, and doing a lot of other things as well. So how much does it cost us? So we've got no big checkbook, no contract. That guy will become more apparent in a second. That's a transition error. So $200 per month we pay for AWS, and that's actually quite high for the AWS serverless stuff. It's mainly due to the device, managing the device level events. If you look at Lambda specifically, I think we're paying about $6 a month or something, or $8 a month. It's really, really crazily cheap. And the reason it's crazily cheap is because I'm cheating, because these things are created for big distributed systems, and I'm using them for effectively business transactions. So that's cheaper than hiring a Volkswagen Polo for a month, which is, puts it in context. We, on average, have had 3 developers since we started on this, on the AWS stuff. It's over quite a period of time, so it's just like an average. So I was talking to one of the developers about, well, should we get an ESB and, you know, something like, I don't know, from IBM or whatever, MuleSoft, and he was just saying, well, and this is now 2 years down the line, AWS is just so easy, he couldn't see the justification. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, we got choice, and it depends on context whether, you know, serverless is the right thing for you or an ESB or whatever. I would say that you can get into a mess with the serverless stuff very easily if you don't have good, well-organized developers, probably more than you can with something like MuleSoft, which is more opinionated, gives you more of an out-of-the-box framework. So there's a number of different considerations, but I think, you know, I couldn't say without looking at someone's context, go one route or the other for the kind of use that we've used it for. the interesting thing is that AWS, they've got the serverless stuff, but they're steadily moving higher up the stack. So they've got AWS Connect, which is a call center. So I go on do all my shopping online, then I can create a call center within the AWS console. So I did that. I've actually got a call center running under my AWS account. It's like charging me $1 a month or $1 a month or something. I should really shut it down because I'm not using it for anything. But I created it, and then I rang in, and the call came in. It's like, you know, just with clicks, amazing. And there's a few rumors about Amazon getting into the low-code, no-code space. At the start of this year, people were talking about that, which is really getting into the Salesforce kind of platform area. I don't think they'll do that because they want companies like Salesforce to be on top of their services, so then they can piggyback off the back of Salesforce marketing and, you know, all that good stuff which earns Salesforce billions of dollars. And if there's a bit of AWS underneath that, it'll earn Amazon loads of money. But you know, these rumors don't go away. So, and with things like Amazon Connect, you know, it's a possibility. So last thing, this is actually a sign that's in my my hometown in Preston. Say no to overdevelopment. And my wife is from the Philippines, a developing country. She finds it quite funny, the term overdevelopment, and especially saying no to it. It's about like building, you know, houses in countryside and all that kind of thing. So she's always say, oh yeah, you wouldn't want too many nice 3-bedroom houses and all that. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? As we're driving along, and I'm like, well, okay, yeah, fine. This is just an analogy with Salesforce. In that Salesforce, I think it's got choices. They have choices to make. They can choose to stay within their kind of comfortable realm or branch out like they have done with MuleSoft and other areas. I just think they need to be a little bit careful looking to one side when there's companies like AWS who may be doing the equivalent much more cheaply or more kind of commodity-like. So that's just really an open question as to, you know, how far should Salesforce go in that area, and I don't have an answer. So that's me. Time's up, I think. Don't know if there's time for questions. Are there any questions? Anyone use serverless stuff? Cool. Any questions of any description? None? Well, thank you very much for your time.